It's what you owe me, and I want it paying.
That is what you can do with your flaming bill.
This is the story of how one of Coronation Street's most beloved characters met a shocking end, and how the actor behind him watched 23 years of work vanish in a matter of months. Peter Adamson, who brought the rough-and-ready builder Len Fairclough to life from 1961 to 83, didn't just leave the street. He got systematically written out, publicly shamed, and sent packing in one of British television's most controversial departures.
I said I want it paying.
Take your hand off me.
When you paid me.
Oh, now, come on. Stop it.
Take your hand off me!
Over 1,700 episodes. That's how many times Peter Adamson appeared as Len Fairclough, making the character as much a part of the Cobbles as the Rover's return itself. The Liverpudlian actor played the program's alpha male, the hard-drinking builder with a heart of gold who could charm the ladies and throw a punch when needed. 20 million viewers tuned in when he married Rita Littlewood in April '77, making it the most-watched episode of the entire decade. The lad had it all: fame, fortune, and a character so iconic that people couldn't separate Peter from Len.
Look, if there's one thing wrong with Coronation Street, it's because it sometimes throws up nasty, sniveling little clever dicks like you.
January '61 brought Peter Adamson to Coronation Street on what was meant to be a 12-week contract at £10 a week. The show itself was brand new, and nobody knew if it would last beyond a few months. Peter had been working in repertory theatre, where he'd met his wife Jean Duncan, married her back in '53, and started a family with 2 sons, Michael and Greg. Jean had suffered from rheumatoid arthritis since her teens, and even in those early days, Peter worried about providing for his family as her condition worsened. Len Fairclough struck a chord with viewers immediately. Here stood a proper working-class man, a builder who drank in the pub, got into scraps, and wasn't afraid to speak his mind. Peter brought an authenticity to the role that couldn't be faked because he was Len. The tough exterior, the quick temper, the soft heart underneath. Script editor H.V. Kershaw later credited Peter's skill as an actor, saying Len was originally just meant to be a social partner for Harry Hewitt, but was played so assertively that it rapidly achieved importance of its own.
Somebody call the police.
That's right, go on, call them. It'll all be over by the time they get
Then
here.
it'll be the police.
This is the fella that shopped us.
But behind the scenes, things were far more complicated than anyone realized, and in early '83, everything started to unravel. Liverpool, 16th of February, 1930. Peter Adamson arrived as the youngest of 6 children to a father who managed a menswear shop. Young Peter left school at just 14 to work in a solicitor's office, but the theatre called to him. After taking part in a community play at 17, he moved to London and attended the London Academy of Music and Dramatic Art. Left after just 2 months. But that didn't stop him. Repertory theatre across the Northwest gave him work. He set up his own theatre company, and slowly he built a career.
There's only one person bothering anybody around here, mate. That's you bothering me.
December 1960 brought Coronation Street into existence, and Peter auditioned for the roles of Dennis Tanner and Ken Barlow. At 30 years old, he was deemed too old for either part, but the producers saw something in him. They cast him as Len Fairclough, a builder who first appeared in January '61, and what was meant to be a minor role quickly became something much bigger. Peter's rugged quality and natural northern authenticity made Len leap off the screen, and by '64, when other leading men left the program, Len became the street's central male character. The mid-'60s rolled around with Len leading the male defense against what Kershaw called the monstrous battalions of the street's women. Money beyond anything Peter had ever imagined came with that position. That £10,000 annual salary in the early 60s would be worth well over $200,000 today, and he could double it with personal appearances at clubs and events across the country.
Because you've been sniffing round my bird.
Are you asking me to put one on you?
You're the one who's asking for it.
People wanted to meet Len Fairclough, and Peter Adamson gave them exactly what they wanted. Everything an actor could want arrived with the role. Peter bought a lavish home, a cottage in Wales, and a spectacular villa in Mallorca, drove expensive cars, and lived the high life. For a lad from Liverpool who'd left school at 14, it was the stuff of dreams. But here's the thing. The drinking that made Len such a compelling character was bleeding into Peter's real life. His brother Clifford believed that playing a hard-drinking character 5 days a week, spending hours in a fake pub, had triggered something in Peter. The lines blurred between actor and role. When Peter went to actual pubs after filming, he was still Len. Or was Len becoming Peter? Even Peter himself probably couldn't have answered that.
Who wants 3 horses in a race like that?
The incidents piled up like empty bottles. Pub brawls, drunken rows, that drink-driving conviction in '66. Granada kept him on because the viewing figures were too good to ignore. Peter Adamson was Coronation Street in many viewers' minds, and getting rid of him would have been unthinkable. They tolerated it, warned him, and suspended him when absolutely necessary. A serious drinking problem had taken hold by the late 60s. November '66 brought a 30-quid fine and a year's driving ban after being arrested for drunk driving. He'd turn up on set after a binge, struggling through his lines, while producer Bill Podmore later recalled that Peter had been hitting the bottle for years, trying to escape his fame, massive tax debts, and the sorrow of watching his wife Jean battle chronic arthritis that was slowly crippling her. One week in '69, everything came to a head when a crucial storyline centered around Len Fairclough, and Peter turned up drunk. He couldn't deliver his lines, so Granada suspended him without pay and sent him to Rossendale General Hospital to dry out. 14 episodes went by without him. The formidable Violet Carson, who played Ina Sharples, had complained to Podmore with characteristic tact and dignity, saying she didn't like working with people who'd had too much to drink. 15 years of sobriety while playing a character who spent half his screen time propping up a bar, that takes extraordinary willpower. Peter later explained that he'd turned to drink to escape his fame, the crushing tax debts, and the sorrow of watching Jean deteriorate. The arthritis was relentless. She lived in constant pain, and there was nothing he could do except work harder, earn more money, and try to give her the best life possible despite her suffering. February '73 brought complete sobriety with AA's help. After that suspension, forced Peter to turn things around. The achievement was remarkable, and it allowed him to continue playing Len through the character's most significant storylines, the wedding to Rita in '77, becoming a foster parent, serving on the council. Peter was back on top. The heart of the show in the '70s became the relationship between Len and Rita. Producer Bill Podmore decided they should finally marry in '77, and both Peter and Barbara Knox argued against it, genuinely believing a wedding could be the beginning of the end for their characters. Len and Rita's value, they felt, was in the tension, the on-off nature of their romance, but Podmore pushed ahead, and he was right. That wedding episode in April '77 brought in 20 million viewers. 20 million people tuned in to see Len Fairclough marry Rita Littlewood. TV Times even published a special souvenir magazine, and the cast performed the ceremony twice, once for photographs and once for filming. 57 years old, playing a character who'd been on screens for 16 years, and Peter was more popular than ever. That was the peak of his career, but cracks were forming. £25,000 a year from Coronation Street was what Peter earned by the early 80s, up from $12,000 in '74. The money was still good, but it wasn't enough because he still owed massive sums to the Inland Revenue from his drinking years. Jean's medical care was expensive, and the houses, the villa, the lifestyle he'd built required constant maintenance. Peter felt undervalued after giving the show 22 years and creating an icon, and he wanted more recognition, more money, more respect. That's the context for what happened in February '83. When Peter sold those stories to The Sun, he wasn't just being vindictive. He needed the money, and perhaps, after years of keeping Granada's secrets and playing the good soldier, he wanted to speak his mind. Behind-the-scenes stories about his Coronation Street co-stars went to the Sun newspaper, and the articles were branded "Len Let's Rip." Brutal doesn't begin to describe them. He called some actors amateurs, said Anne Kirkbride, who played Deirdre, was propping up the bar too much, and called her a lazy so-and-so. He admitted he didn't get on at all with Barbara Knox, who played his screen wife Rita, said Doris Speed was going deaf, and claimed Cheryl Murray was too full of herself. Granada was furious because the company was fiercely protective of Coronation Street's public image and closely controlled all press contact. Producer Bill Podmore gave Peter a stark warning that if he ever sold stories again, he'd be dismissed for breach of contract. Peter had crossed a line, but he was given a chance to make amends. Granada's 6-week suspension was actually lenient under the circumstances because they could have sacked him immediately, but they gave him a warning and a suspension scheduled to begin in June and July of '83. Serve your time, keep your head down, and we'll move past this. That was the deal. Peter never got the chance to serve that suspension. Late April '83 brought something that would change everything. The 23rd of April saw Peter arrested, and the next morning, newspapers reported he'd been charged with 2 incidents at a public swimming pool in Haslingden, where he worked as a part-time instructor. The allegations were serious, so Peter asked Granada to write him out of the program until his court case was over. The 11th of May, 1983, brought the broadcast of his final appearance as Len Fairclough, filmed in late March before any of this had happened. Viewers saw Len playing darts in the Rovers, completely unaware it would be the last time they'd see him. And for months, the character was simply said to be away working on a contract. Peter had been working as a part-time swimming instructor, teaching children, doing something for charity that he enjoyed. Suddenly, he was arrested, held overnight in police cells, and charged with serious offenses. The whole Coronation Street cast read about it in the Sunday papers. Some had been friends, others had already turned against him after the newspaper articles, but now, even those who'd supported him had to distance themselves because the show couldn't be associated with this. The 18th of July brought the start of Peter's trial, with representation by George Carman QC, one of Britain's most prominent celebrity defense barristers. The legal fees were staggering, eventually reaching £120,000, and on the 26th of July, a jury at Burnley Crown Court found Peter not guilty. He was acquitted of all charges. You'd think that would be the end of it, but this is where the story takes an even darker turn. Peter approached Granada for help with what was becoming an enormous legal bill while awaiting his trial verdict. The company was preparing to hand over a £10,000 loan check, but then Peter admitted something that sealed his fate. He'd signed another unauthorized contract to sell his memoirs to The Sun and the News of the World after being warned just months earlier that another breach would mean dismissal. What was he thinking? Even Peter probably couldn't have explained it, because desperation does strange things to people. He needed money for the trial. The newspapers were offering £70,000 for his memoirs, and that would nearly cover the legal fees. In his mind, perhaps he'd already been destroyed. His reputation was in tatters. The cast hated him. Viewers had read the allegations. What more could Granada do to him? The check was hastily withdrawn. Producer Bill Podmore organized a meeting and demanded Peter give definite assurances that he'd never again break Granada's rules on press interviews. But Peter refused and walked out of the office. 2 months after being acquitted in court, Peter Adamson was sacked from Coronation Street for breach of contract on the 26th of August, 83. He was on holiday in Bali when Granada sealed his fate, and he later accused Podmore of not having the courage to sack him face to face. Podmore's response was blunt. Peter himself had made a face-to-face meeting impossible by taking a holiday in Bali when the decision was made, leaving them with no alternative but to put it in writing and mail it to his home. The 12th of September brought Podmore and his colleague Mervyn Watson making the decision to axe Len Fairclough. But they didn't just axe him. They did it in a way that ensured viewers would feel no sympathy for the character. 7 months after Peter's last appearance, the 7th of December 83 revealed that Len had died in a motorway crash after falling asleep at the wheel, and crucially, he'd been returning home from visiting his secret mistress, Marjorie Proctor, in Bolton. He'd been cheating on Rita. The sacking itself wasn't the cruelest part because Peter had broken his contract twice, and Granada was within their rights. But the manner of Len's death felt like revenge to Peter, and it's hard to argue he was completely wrong. Cheating on Rita, having an affair with another woman, dying on the way back from his mistress. After 23 years of being the street's hero, Len Fairclough's last act was betrayal. The public saw this as another twist of the knife, and Peter certainly did, claiming it was motivated by sheer spite, that Granada wanted to turn viewers against Len to punish Peter for everything that had happened. Podmore and the writers insisted the affair storyline was simply about creating the most dramatic exit possible for such a major character because a man of Len's fame could only be killed off with maximum drama. But other options existed. Len could have died saving someone, could have had a heart attack at home, could have lost his life in a building site accident, going out as a working man. They chose to make him a cheat instead, and whether it was spite or drama or both, the result was the same. Len Fairclough's legacy was tarnished forever. The morning after Len's death aired brought Peter Adamson appearing on TV dressed in a top hat and undertaker's suit. He delivered an obituary for Len Fairclough and recited a bitter poem taking shots at both Coronation Street and Granada, telling reporters that about 10 of them had built the street, brick by brick almost, working 18-hour days, sweating tears of blood, and he'd been Spencer Tracy of the street until this bombshell sacking. Defiant, bitter, and the end of everything. His divorce from the program was complete. Peter and his wife Jean then disappeared, and the media tracked them down in Bali. Returning to England brought attempts to rebuild his career. Peter starred in a West End production of Dial M for Murder at the Vaudeville Theatre with Hayley Mills and Simon Ward from November 83 through March 84, and the play was successful. The audiences liked him, the critics were kind, and for a brief moment, it looked like Peter Adamson might have a post-Coronation Street career. BBC Radio 4 brought him work reading short stories. Plays in Cambridge and Darlington gave him parts, and in 86 and 87, he even worked in Canada, including a guest role in the detective drama Adderley, but work was increasingly hard to come by. Typecasting played a part because after 23 years as Len Fairclough, casting directors couldn't see him as anyone else, but his reputation and his renewed drinking problem made things worse. Gene died in September '84 from septicemia at just 51 years old after suffering so much for so long, and Peter, who'd been sober for 15 years, fell off the wagon and started drinking again. A TVS program called Regrets featured Peter talking about the trial and its aftermath in '85, but Granada refused to air the episode and threatened TVS with legal action for using the Coronation Street theme and photographs from the series. Peter had criticized Granada over his dismissal, and the company was having none of it. Late '88 brought a return to the UK after his Canadian work with Peter, playing Sir Tunbelly Clumsy in a revival of The Relapse at the Mermaid Theatre. But his drinking and reputation meant acting roles became increasingly rare after that. Bankruptcy came in 1991 with debts of £32,000, largely due to the legal fees from his 1983 trial. 61 years old, and the man who'd once earned £25,000 a year and owned property across Britain and Spain was financially ruined. The final decade of his life reads like a Greek tragedy. Bankruptcy in '91, living on benefits in Welton, Lincolnshire, writing to old friends who never wrote back. Peter retired from acting entirely after his bankruptcy and spent the final decade of his life on the state pension and benefits in a one-bedroom housing association flat in Welton, Lincolnshire, a million miles from the villas and cottages and lavish lifestyle he'd once enjoyed. An interview in '94 revealed that none of his Coronation Street cast members had contacted him since his sacking, and he'd written twice to Julie Goodyear, who he'd been very close to during his time on the show, but she never replied. Watching Coronation Street on television meant seeing the place that had been his whole life continue without him, as if he'd never existed. Stomach cancer took Peter Adamson on the 17th of January 2002 at Lincoln County Hospital. 71 years old, he left £5,000 to his elder son, Michael. Johnny Briggs and Jean Alexander paid tribute, with Jean saying it was sad he'd gone, but she hoped he was at peace. But tellingly, no Coronation Street cast member, past or present, attended his funeral. The fact that no cast member showed up when he died in 2002 spoke volumes. Peter Adamson had become a ghost, erased from the very show he'd helped build. So what's the truth about Peter Adamson's exit from Coronation Street? The facts are these. He was a brilliant actor who created one of British television's most iconic characters, but he was also a troubled man who struggled with drinking, massive debts, and the pain of watching his wife suffer. Early '83 brought financial ruin, and facing that reality, he made a series of catastrophic decisions, selling stories about his colleagues and breaking his contract. He was then caught up in serious allegations that, though he was cleared in court, destroyed any remaining goodwill with Granada. But was he treated fairly? That's where opinions differ. Peter himself believed Granada used the affair storyline to punish him, to ensure viewers would remember Len as a cheat rather than a hero, while the producers insisted it was simply about drama. What's undeniable is that Granada could have chosen to give Len a dignified exit, but chose not to. Nearly 2 decades of paying the price for decisions he made in a few short months followed. Peter lost his career, his reputation, his wealth, and his connections, dying alone, far from the fame he'd once enjoyed, with none of his old colleagues at his side. 53 years old when Len Fairclough finally left Coronation Street, Peter Adamson lost everything and spent the next 19 years paying for it. The The truth about his departure isn't just about what he did, it's about how completely and utterly his life fell apart afterwards, and how the television industry that had made him famous showed him absolutely no mercy when he needed it most.